Alright guys, so we're on chapter 13 of Tortilla Flat. I'm almost done with this book. If I was pleasure reading it, probably would finish it pretty quickly. It's less than 170 pages, a little over 170. Alright guys, we're on chapter 13. How Danny's friends threw themselves to the aid of a distressed lady. How Danny's friends threw themselves into the aid of a distressed lady. Just making sure my shit's plugged in. John Steinbeck, man, to me, one of the best authors I've ever, one of the best storytellers, man. So chapter 13, how Danny's friends threw themselves to the aid of a distressed lady. Senora Teresina Cortez and her 8 children and her ancient mother lived in a pleasant cottage on the edge of the deep gulch that defines the southern frontier of Tortilla Flat. Teresina was a good figure of a mature woman, nearing 30. Her mother, that ancient, dried, toothless one, relict of a past generation, was nearly 50. Doesn't seem that old. It was long ago since anyone had remembered that her name was Angelica. During the week, work was ready to this vieja's hand, for it was her duty to feed, punish, cajole, dress, and bed down 7 of the 8 children. Teresina was busy with the 8th and with making certain preparations for the 9th. On Sunday, however, the vieja, clad in black satin, more ancient even than she, had it in a grim and durable affair of black straw, on which were fastened 2 true cherries of enameled plaster, threw duty to the wind, and went firmly to church, where she sat as motionless as the saints in their niches. Once a month in the afternoon she went to confession. It would be interesting to know what sins she confessed and where she found the time to commit them. For in Teresina's house there were creepers, crawlers, tumblers, shriekers, cat killers, fallers out of trees, and each one of these charges could be trusted to be ravenous every 2 hours. Is it any wonder that the vieja had a remote soul and nerves of steel? Any other kind would have gone screaming out of her body like little skyrockets. Teresina was a mildly puzzled woman as far as her mind was concerned. Her body was one of those perfect retorts for the distillation of children. The first baby conceived when she was 14 had been a shock to her, such a shock that she delivered it in the ballpark at night, wrapped it in newspaper, and left it for the night watchman to find. This is a secret. Even now Teresina might get into trouble if it were known. When she was 16, Mr. Alfred Cortez married her and gave her his name and the 2 foundations of her family. Alfredo and Ernie, Mr. Cortez gave her that name gladly. He was only using it temporarily anyway. His name before he came to Monterey and after he left was Guglielmo. He went away after Ernie was born. Perhaps he foresaw that being married to Teresina was not going to be a quiet life. The regularity with which she became a mother always astonished Teresina. It occurred sometimes that she could not remember who the father of the impending baby was, and occasionally she almost grew convinced that no lover was necessary. In the time when she had been under quarantine as a diphtheria carrier, she conceived just the same. However, when a question became too complicated for her mind to unravel, she usually laid that problem in the arms of the mother of Jesus, who she knew had more knowledge of, interest in, and time for such things than she. Teresina went often to confession. She was the despair of Father Ramon. Indeed, he had seen that while her knees, her hands, and her lips did penance for an old sin, her modest and provocative eyes, flashing under drawn lashes, laid the foundations for a new one. During the time I have been telling this, Teresina's 9th child was born, and for the moment she was unengaged. The vieja received another charge. Alfredo entered his 3rd year in the 1st grade, Ernie his 2nd, and Pachito went to school for the first time. At about this time in California, it became the stylish thing for school nurses to visit the classes and to catechize the children on intimate details of their home life. Catechize. In the 1st grade, Alfredo was called to the principal's office, for it was thought that he looked thin. The visiting nurse, trained in child psychology, said kindly, "Freddie, do you get enough to eat?" "Sure," said Alfredo. "Well now, tell me what you have for breakfast." "Tortillas and beans," said Alfredo. The nurse nodded her head dismally to the principal. "What do you have when you go home for lunch?" "I don't go home." "Don't you eat at noon?" "Sure, I bring some beans wrapped up in a tortilla." Actual alarm shone in the nurse's eyes, but she controlled herself. "At night, what do you have to eat?" "Tortillas and beans." Her psychology deserted her. Do you mean to stand there and tell me you eat nothing but tortillas and beans? Alfredo was astonished. Jesus Christ, he said, what more do you want? In due course, the school doctor listened to the nurse's horrified report. One day he drove up to Teresina's house to look into the matter. As he walked through the yard, the creepers, the crawlers, and the stumblers were shrieking one terrible symphony. The doctor stood in the open kitchen door with his own eyes. He saw the vieja go to the stove, dip a great spoon into a kettle, and sow the floor with boiled beans. Instantly the noise ceased. Creepers, crawlers, and stumblers went to work with silent industry, moving from bean to bean, pausing only to eat them. The vieja went back to her chair for a few moments of peace. Under the bed, under the chairs, under the stove, the children crawled with the intentness of little bugs. The doctor stayed 2 hours, for his scientific interest was piqued. He went away shaking his head. He shook his head incredulously while he made his report. I gave them every test I know of, he said. Teeth, skin, blood, skeleton, eyes, coordination. Gentlemen, they are living on what constitutes a slow poison, and they have from birth. Gentlemen, I tell you, I have never seen healthier children in my life. His emotion overcame him. The little beast, he cried. I never saw such teeth in my life. I never saw such teeth. You will wonder how Teresina procured food for her family. When the bean threshers have passed, you will see where they have stopped big piles of bean chaff. If you will spread a blanket on the ground and on a windy afternoon toss the chaff in the air over the blanket, you will understand that the threshers are not infallible. For an afternoon of work, you may collect 20 or more pounds of beans. In the autumn, the vieja and those children who could walk went into the fields and winnowed the chaff. The landowners did not mind, for she did no harm. It was a bad year when the vieja did not collect 300 or 400 pounds of beans. When you have 400 pounds of beans in the house, you need have no fear of starvation. Other things, delicacies such as sugar, tomatoes, peppers, coffee, fish, or meat, may have come sometimes miraculously through the intercession of the Virgin, sometimes through industry or cleverness, but your beans are there, and you are safe. Beans are a roof over your stomach. Beans are a warm cloak against economic cold. Only one thing could threaten the lives and happiness of the family of the Señora Teresina Cortez. That was a failure of the bean crop. When the beans are ripe, the little bushes are pulled and gathered into piles to dry crisp for the threshers. Then is the time to pray that the rain may hold off. When the little piles of beans lie in lines, yellow against the dark fields, you will see the farmers watching the sky, scowling with dread at every cloud that sails over. For if a rain comes, the bean piles must be turned over to dry again. And if more rain falls before they are dry, they must be turned again. If a third shower falls, mildew and rot set in, and the crop is lost. When the beans were drying, it was the vieja's custom to burn a candle to the Virgin. In the year of which I speak, the beans were piled and the candle had been burned. At Teresina's house, the gunny sacks were laid out in readiness. The threshing machines were oiled and cleaned. A shower fell. Extra hands rushed to the fields and turned the sodden hummocks of beans. The vieja burned another candle. More rain fell. Then the vieja bought 2 candles with the little gold piece she had kept for many years. Let me put my window open quick. So more rain fell. Then the vieja bought 2 candles with the little gold piece she had kept for many years. The field's hands turned over the beans to the sun again, and then came a downpour of cold-streaking rain. Not a bean was harvested in all Monterey County. The soggy lumps were turned under by the plows. Oh, then, distress entered the house of Señora Teresina Cortez. The staff of life was broken, the little roof destroyed. Gone was that eternal verity, beans. At night the children cried with terror at the approaching starvation. They were not told, but they knew. The vieja sat in church as always, but her lips drew back in a sneer when she looked at the Virgin. You took my candles, she thought. Oh, yes, greedy you are for candles, oh thoughtless one. And sullenly she transferred her allegiance to Santa Clara. She told Santa Clara of the injustice that had been done. She permitted herself a little malicious thought at the virgin birth. You know, sometimes Teresina can't remember either, she told Santa Clara viciously. She's saying my daughter doesn't know who her baby daddy is sometimes either. It has been said that Jesus Maria Corcoran was a great-hearted man. He had also that gift some humanitarians possess of being inevitably drawn toward those spheres where his instinct was needed. So they're going to use him. How many times had he not come upon young ladies when they needed comforting? Toward any pain or sorrow he was irresistibly drawn. He had not been at Teresina's house for many months. If there is no mystical attraction between pain and humanitarianism, how did it happen that he went there to call on the very day when the last of the old year's beans was put in the pot? He sat in Teresina's kitchen, gently brushing children off his legs, and he looked at Teresina with polite and pained eyes while she told of the calamity. He watched, fascinated, when she turned the last bean sack inside out to show that not one single bean was left. He nodded sympathetically when she pointed out the children so soon to be skeletons, so soon to die of starvation. Then the vieja told bitterly how she had been tricked by the Virgin, but upon this point Jesus Maria was not sympathetic. "What do you know, old one?" he said sternly. "Maybe the Blessed Virgin had business someplace else." "But 4 candles I burned," the vieja insisted shrilly. Jesus Maria regarded her coldly. "What are 4 candles to her?" he said. "I have seen one church where she had hundreds. She is no miser of candles." Or she had hundreds. But his mind burned with Teresina's trouble. That evening he talked mightily and piteously to the friends at Danny's house, or piteously. Out of his great heart he drew a compelling oratory, a passionate plea for those little children who had no beans, and so telling was his speech that the fire in his heart ignited the hearts of his friends. They leaped up, their eyes glowed. "The children shall not starve," they cried. "It shall be our trust." "We live in luxury," Pilon said. "We shall give of our substance," Danny agreed, "and if they needed a house, they could live here." "Tomorrow we shall start," Paulo exclaimed. "No more laziness, to work, there are things to be done." Jesus Maria felt the gratification of a leader with followers. Theirs was no idle boast. Fish they collected, the vegetable patch of the Hotel Del Monte they raided. It was a glorious game. They robbed of the stigma of theft, crime altruistically committed. What is more gratifying? Crime altruistically, like for the sake of others. That's altruism. The pirate raised the price of kindlings to 30 cents and went to 3 new restaurants every morning. Big Joe stole Mrs. Balochico's go over and over again, and each time it went home. Now food began to accumulate in the house of Teresina. Boxes of lettuce lay on her porch. Spoiled mackerel filled the neighborhood with a strong odor, and still the flame of charity burned in the friends. If you could see the complaint book at the Monterey Police Department, you would notice that during this time, there was a minor crime wave in Monterey. The police car hurried from place to place. Here a chicken was taken, there a whole patch of pumpkins. Palladini Company reported the loss of 200-pound cases of abalone steaks. Teresina's house was growing crowded. The kitchen was stacked high with food. The back porch overflowed with vegetables. Odors like those of a packing house permeated Tortilla Flat. Breathlessly, the friends dashed about at their larcenies, and long they talked and planned with Teresina. At first Teresina was maddened with joy at so much food, and her head was turned by the compliment. After a week of it, she was not so sure. The baby was down with colic. Ernie had some kind of bowel trouble. Alfredo's face was flushed. The creepers and crawlers cried all the time. Teresina was ashamed to tell the friends what she must tell them. It took her several days to get her courage up, and during that time there arrived 50 pounds of celery and a crate of cantaloupes. At last she had to tell them. The neighbors were beginning to look at her with lifted brows. She asked all of Danny's friends into her kitchen, and then she informed them of the trouble, modestly and carefully, that their feelings might not be hurt. "Green things and fruit are not good for children," she explained. "Milk is constipating to a baby after it is weaned." She pointed to the flushed and irritable children. "See, they were all sick. They were not getting the proper food." "What is the proper food?" Ballon demanded. "Beans," she said. "Then you have something to trust, something that will not go right through you." Or beans, she said. "There you have something to trust, something that will not go right through you." The friends went silently away. They pretended to themselves to be disheartened, but they knew that the first fire of their enthusiasm had been lacking for several days. At Danny's house they held a conference. This must not be told in some circles, for the charge might be serious. Long after midnight, 4 dark forms, who shall be nameless, moved like shadows through the town. 4 indistinct shapes crept up on the Western Warehouse Company platform. The watchman said afterward that he heard sounds, investigated, and saw nothing. He could not say how the thing was done, how a lock was broken and the door forced. Only 4 men know that the watchman was sound asleep, and they will never tell on him. A little later, the 4 shadows left the warehouse, and now they were bent under tremendous loads. Pantings and snortings came from the shadows. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Teresina was awakened by hearing her back door open. "Who was there?" she cried. There was no answer, but she heard 4 great thumps that shook the house. She lighted a candle and went to the kitchen in her bare feet. There, against the wall, stood 400-pound sacks of pink beans. Teresina rushed in and awakened the vieja. "A miracle!" she cried. "Come look in the kitchen." The vieja regarded with shame the plump full sacks Oh, miserable, dirty sinner am I, she moaned. O holy mother, look with pity on an old fool. Every month thou shalt have a candle as long as I live. At Danny's house, 4 friends were lying happily in their blankets. What pillow can one have like a good conscience? They slept well into the afternoon, for their work was done. And Teresina discovered by a method she had found to be infallible that she was going to have a baby. As she poured a quart of the new beans into the kettle, she wondered idly which one of Danny's friends was responsible. Pretty funny, isn't she? Peace.